My price. My price was 4 children, a relationship, not a marriage because I wasn't married, but at the time, but a relationship. Tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. My career, my sanity, my health. It cost everything. I don't think there was anything I didn't lose. Yeah. I'm Stephen Beardwood. I retired after 17 years in the Canadian military. I was a medical assistant. I spent 7 years with the Airborne as a commando, with the battle group and the Airborne Regiment itself. I was deployed into Somalia in December 26th of 1992. So my brother had come up. We spent the Christmas. Well, we spent a couple days together, almost a week. We built a dollhouse for my daughter Monique, and we did that in the basement at night. And we celebrated Christmas Day. Boxing Day, I left, and he took the kids back down to Hamilton to be with the family for the rest of the holidays. I then had a live-in nanny who was a friend of the family, came up and stayed with the children for the next 6 months. So, yeah, I was a single parent. My wife at that point in time had walked out, and I was on my own with a 3 and a 1-year-old. That was about three or 4 years from the end. No, I had already spent 7 years in the reserves, and probably all equal amount of time in the regular force, or close to it anyways, at least 5 or 6 years, regular force at that point. So.
Had you been deployed before?
I've been on courses and stuff like that. This was the first of the actual active deployments that the Canadian military had done in a long time. Prior to that, I think the Golden Heights was the biggest, conflict type zone. What caused the trauma? Well, that's still up to debate. The diagnosis I received was post-traumatic stress disorder. It's based on the assumption that the trauma was caused by the emotional, psychological things that we faced when we were over in a combat zone. I spent 4 years trying to get answers and help. And I got help from a base surgeon. At the time, the Canadian Forces had no expertise in post-traumatic stress. They just didn't exist. The only thing that the specialists could tell us was that because we weren't behaving normally, that was normal. Right? Because if we were behaving normally after what we had been through, then they suspect that would be abnormal. That wasn't very helpful. So I managed Major Wojtek was a base surgeon. I worked with him for a couple of years in Kingston prior to being released, and he helped me get to a post-traumatic stress specialist outside of the military. That was effective. That was the first time I heard also mefloquine toxicity. And the real question on the post-traumatic stress is what separates, or where does post-traumatic stress end, and where does the side effects of what is now known as a neurotoxin begin? And mefloquine is a neurotoxin.
What is
Mefloquine was at the time we were taking it, I believe, an experimental anti-malarial medication. There were supposed to be controls on it. There weren't. The dosages, I don't know if they were correct or not. I mean, there's so much which is controversy. Where does it begin? Where does it end? The bottom line from the military perspective and from the signing the contract perspective when you join the military is you agree to allow the military to use your mind, your body, and your soul. And if they damage it, they will compensate you for it financially. They compensated me for it financially, whether they call it post-traumatic stress or methylene toxicity. So from the contract perspective, that's all that matters, is the contract was fulfilled. In dealing with the reality, how do you get past the medical or mental or trauma that you're experiencing when you can't isolate the cause? What's the right course of treatment? What's the right direction to go? What's the right modality of treatment even because there's so many of them? Initially, I didn't think it had changed me, other than when I first got back, I really started noticing that much of what we saw over there was very prominent in Canadian society. To me, there wasn't a huge difference any longer. I saw the same starvation that you saw in the streets, the poverty, the total lack of empathy of one group of people towards another because they were different or because they weren't within the same class or culture. And that was the first thing I observed when I got back. And so I was changed emotionally in that respect, was I started seeing that here in Canada where I hadn't seen it before. It opened my eyes that we're not immune. We're as much a third world country as a third world country is. The only difference is we have money to deal with it. But about 6 months into return, when I started getting back into training and stuff, I started having a severe stress reaction in that I had transfer in time and place in flashbacks. So the first one occurred in a beer store. I had gone to pick up a case of beer and I was surrounded by people, and all of a sudden I wasn't in the beer store anymore. I was back in Somalia and back into a situation there. And I went through 2 other episodes like that. One, I was actually on a field exercise, and it was November, and I was going through a trench system from one trench to another. And as I was walking, suddenly I was literally in the desert walking through a path, and I got to where my trench was, and that's when I kind of came out of it. And I knew that it wasn't real, but I knew that I was having a problem. And after the third event, that was the sort of like, okay, I think I need to get help. But it wasn't the only thing, because when I looked back, I realized that I couldn't put my hands in my pockets. Now, soldiers aren't supposed to put their hands in their pockets. I couldn't put my hands in my pockets. They had to be ready for defense. I couldn't walk with holding my child's hand, because if I was holding their hand, I couldn't use my hand for defense. I would automatically reach for my weapon, because sometimes I think that was just habit, because 6 months you never went anywhere without your rifle, and so I was always looking for that rifle, But there was other things too, a hypervigilance. Like it was like I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep from the time I took the mefloquine, which was partly my fault, because I did not report it. If I had reported it, there's a good chance I wouldn't have been deployed. It wasn't likely that I was going to give up deployment. But sleep, I never had the nightmares that other people had. I just didn't sleep. I would sleep for an hour, wake up, and maybe get another hour's sleep later on. So quite often I would just do radio shift in the middle of the night, or do the night security, whatever it required, because I was going to be up anyways. But the sleep disorder continued even after I get home, and that turned into night terrors. So I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, in cold sweats or hot sweats, whatever you want to look at it. And there was other things that like there was this anger that was constant, just always just right here, and then it would start spiking, but it would never go below that certain point. Those were the most common, or the ones that were prominent anyways for myself. At the time, I like to believe it didn't. um, and, and I think it's important to understand that it's not because I didn't want to believe it. It's because the physical trauma of post-traumatic stress is caused by prolonged release of cortisol into the brain. So those neural pathways are damaged, and it becomes a physical inability to connect, to have empathy, or to have that close intimacy. You start distancing yourself. I mean, as a soldier, you're already distanced yourself. You're going away for 6 months. You've done extended training, so you've distanced yourself. You get ready to leave, and you know you're going to leave, so you withdraw emotionally anyways. So that's a natural thing. Normally, after your deployment, you come back and you re-engage. My problem was I couldn't re-engage physically. I was incapable of re-engaging. The neural pathways I needed were damaged or had died, right? Because of the long, prolonged shutdown of those pathways from the cortisol. And then these other neural pathways, which were for defense, they had become so much more dominant that now they just ruled. So everything was a defense. And then you try to imitate what you see, right? So you see compassion, so you pretend to be compassionate. You try to imitate it because you know it. You've had it in the past. It's something that you've owned, right? And it's just all of a sudden now you can't have it. It's like being an NHL hockey player. I talked with Doug Smith. He's a phenomenal guy. He did a book called The Trauma Code, right? And I've had extensive conversations with Doug Smith. He's one of the first guys who were non-military that I could connect with and explain my story to, and he understood it because he understood trauma. He was paralyzed from the neck down. He went through a whole whack of stuff as well. And the real key is that NHL hockey players are performers, right? I mean, they have to perform, right? They're driven to do and perform at peak, right? They got to score those goals. And soldiers are no different. We're driven to perform. I was a parachutist, a mountain climber, a scuba diver. You name it, I did it. I was the ultimate adventurer, and you paid me to do it, and I would go do it. I didn't care. I loved it. I ate it up, and it was just great. I loved to perform at my top, at peak, everything. And then all of a sudden, here I am, and I can't connect emotionally, right? It's like someone's taking your performance and ripped it away from you, and now you can't perform. You can't perform in a simple function, let alone to the peak of your abilities, right? And that's I think the major frustration that almost every veteran who's gone through this type of trauma is experiencing. Children. I've been able to reconnect with 2 of them, but there's 2 I still have no contact with. Of the 2 I don't have real contact with, 1 has reached out. We've had a couple short text conversations on Facebook, like once or twice in the past year, and that's it. Nothing anytime soon is going to change that. It's gone. Time, the relationship, my children were not allowed to have their father to grow up with, to love them, to be a part of their life, to know that that's where they came from and who they're a part of and all that. Some other guy has raised 2 of my children completely. The other 2 have been messed up and messed around, and that's the loss. That's the real loss. So when I got to the clinic outside the military, I got onto an anticonvulsant, which really helped regulate things. It was like after 2 days on this medication, all of a sudden I can function, I can connect. It's like it was quite amazing. I thought at the time that this was the answer. After 12 years, however, my body was reacting to the medication, and I couldn't stay on it, so I had to get off of it. And once I got off of it, I still had to deal with post-max stress. All those symptoms came back. They had never disappeared. But on top of that, that medication had a side effect, and that side effect was that I ended up on insulin, as a diabetic. And if you take a look at the side effects of that medication, all the signs and symptoms of diabetes are pretty prominent there. So not having a history of diabetes in the family, that was, most probably a medication side effect. So the condition of my health at that time was really, really bad. And I had almost died a couple times, actually just from insulin use, because of my body would suddenly kick in a shot of insulin on its own. And I didn't have enough sugar in my system, so I started going downhill. So we're looking for a way to control all of that and post-traumatic stress without medication. And what we ended up dealing with was core basic nutrition to keep my diabetes under control. But the actual process of dealing with a really highly nutritious meal and the social aspects working with my wife had an interesting side effect. And that was my PTSD symptoms started, I was better able to control them. When I was looking into that, that's when I ran into actually Doug Smith. And it was Doug Smith who basically said, you're trying to reinvent a wheel. That we've known this for some 6 years, that we can rebuild those neural pathways, and with nutrition we can create the right social environment, the right peer support. We can pretty much take a NHL hockey player who got hit in the head with a puck, in 6 months to a year put him back on the ice scoring goals. Well, the trauma to his brain ultimately, right, even though it's a different cause, if you look at the brain scans, they're pretty similar, right? So we shouldn't need to deal with post-traumatic stress for 20 years like I did. I think we should be able to get into the right environment, with the right nutrition, with the right people, and work on those performance objectives, right? Become proficient at engaging in small talk, in compassion, in relationship building. And once you can do that, then you can handle your family, and so bring the family and do them. Doug Smith was kind of like the reinforcement, you know what I mean? I self-discovered what was going on, and basically what he was saying is, yep, you're right, we know this stuff, but there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between what we know and what we practice. And what we collect in data takes approximately 25 to 30 years to become mainstream. So what happens is we discover something, but it doesn't come into marketplace for 25 to 30 years. So the skills we really need to deal with post-traumatic stress are probably still 10 to 15 years away. Like when you think of a doctor entering training or keeping up with training, right? So you have the specialist who takes a course and he says, this is how you treat something, right? He invests, a lot of time and a lot of money to learn those skills. He goes out and he makes a living doing it, right? But the next group of students that come through, they might get the next upgrade, you know what I mean? But those upgrades take so long to filter into the system and through that you might find 1 in 100 that will do your treatment, but you got no idea who that is, right? Because it's not standard across the board, and it won't be for 25 to 30 years, right? There's a disconnect. And now the CIMBER, which is the Canadian military, what's it, CIMBER, Canadian Institute for Veterans. Military. What is it? Canadian Institute for Military and Veterans Health Research. All right, is CIMBER, and it's a collection of 41 universities or something like that in Canada, and anyone who's studying veterans' mental health get together and they share that information with each other, and in order to speed up that process, right? And then the mental health professionals, they come in and they learn as well, so they get to see that upgrade on an annual basis. Veterans House is partnered with Simver and with the University of Regina at this point in time. University of Regina, they teach police officers how to police. Is one of their primary courses for policing, and they also see the post-traumatic stress coming from the police side of things. So they're very interested in what we're doing, because essentially if we can create that peer support network for veterans, then we can duplicate that and create a peer support network for the police. Now there's tons of peer support programs for veterans out there. There's tons of veterans groups. None of them are dealing with a home environment which is comprehensive day-to-day, 24/7. The number one reason I spent 20 years in recovery, 12 years on a drug kind of deal, is because I was physically incapable of doing something. Had I been put in that right environment, which goes back to the hockey player, right? Hockey player gets hit in the head with the puck. They've got a lot of money, a lot of doctors who spend a lot of time all day, every day working with this guy to get him past the mood swings and the disorientation and all the other traumas that go along with the concussion, and get him back onto the ice, skating, performing, confident, shooting goals, right? That kind of money isn't being directed into the veterans, right? Because first off, the system isn't designed for it, right? The system, the medical system in the Canadian Forces is designed to conserve manpower. In fact, that's the role. The role is to conserve manpower, right? So we want to keep as many men operational as we can for as long as we can, and those who we can't keep operational, we want to return them to operational as soon as we can. So everything is designed for the quick fix. There is no quick fix for post-traumatic stress. It's an individual, all the symptoms are individuals. My symptoms could be very, very different than another person's. It's a life condition. It's just a human condition is what it is, right? It's a thing that you have to go out and do. Do it over and over and over again until you become proficient. And because you physically are not capable of doing it, it's much like putting on a pair of pants for the very first time. So if you think back to when you were a child, and you may not remember it, but I'm certain most people have watched a child learning how to put on a pair of pants for the first time. They don't get it right, right? My brother Kirk is going to kill me, but we got a picture of him with his shorts on one leg and his underwear on the other, right? He didn't get it right. And to me, every time I talk about this, that's what I see, right? Is that picture of Kirk. Sorry, Kirk. I love you, but no one gets it right the first time, right? Because we've never put on a pair of pants before, right? And even once we get that pair of pants on the first time, we still struggle. You know what I mean? Sometimes we get both our legs into one leg. You know what I mean? And it just takes time. So if you think about that, it takes you, 6 months to a year to learn how to get dressed by yourself, right? To become proficient at it. And even then, your mother's going to pick out your colors, right? What's the cost of housing someone in a jail for 6 months to 6 years? What's the cost of social services for the children? What's the cost of the courts? The cost of lawyers? What's the cost of loss of productivity? 17-year veteran who could have spent another 10 years in the military, now you have to train someone else to do their job. All the experience gone. What's the cost to hospitalize in a psych ward? What's the cost to the healthcare system? What's the cost to the families, to relationships, to the marriages, to the extended families? I don't think you can put a dollar on it, and even on the dollar amount that you can would be probably hundreds of thousands per year if you add it all up, per person. Right? That's per person, hundreds of thousands per person per year. For what, 20 years? 30 years? 40? Well, doesn't it make more sense to, finance something like veterans, what we're talking about as a veterans house? Finance a place where people who have been through it can, through peer support, walk people through daily living and re-establish connection, re-establish skills, come back in fold into society and into relationships. And life isn't perfect. I still have anger, I still have post-traumatic stress, but I function pretty good today compared to some people who've never had post-traumatic stress, because I've learned what not to do, how to avoid triggers without avoiding life. Right? If I was 24, 25 years younger, and I was still in the military, and I was going to be deployed back to Somalia, knowing what I know, I would still go. I would do some things differently, but I would still go. It's not bitterness, it's insight.